Hi everyone, thank you all so much for joining me today to take you through the new features of Katana 7. Just before we get started, I'll introduce myself. I'm Ruth, I'm a Creative Specialist here at Foundry, and we're also joined by some of the Katana product and engineering teams in the chat. So we'll all be available to answer any questions that you might have throughout the session. So please do feel free to ask as many questions as you like, and let's get started. This is a really exciting release for Katana as it brings you native USD workflows, as well as some really significant performance improvements. These were the key areas of development for this release, as well as the VFX Reference Platform update. So Katana 7 is on the VFX Reference Platform 2023, but this was a dual release, so 6.5 came out at the same time and remains on 2022. The feature set across both versions is exactly the same. So let's jump into the improvements on the performance side. First of all, we've introduced two new cache eviction methods to choose between when using Geolib, which is Katana's scene graph processing engine. These new options are dependency protecting and continual, and you can choose between them from the render settings. They provide you with different options to help improve memory management, so you can be sure to get the best performance no matter what scene you're working on. Some trial and error will probably be needed to determine which option works best for your scene setup and renderer. Another part of the performance improvements included upgrading from single-threaded to multi-threaded live rendering. This means you'll get much faster feedback when making changes to your scene with a live render running, in comparison to previous Katana versions. You'll also see these improvements when using the Foresight Plus features, so when running multiple live renders simultaneously. I'm using Arnold in this example, but these improvements will be seen across all render plugins as well. This release also brings a huge addition to Katana's USD workflows, now supporting native USD stage building and manipulation. The pre-Katana 7 workflows allowed you to bring in USD data, converting it to Katana data for manipulation. While this workflow is still very much valid, working with native USD and therefore skipping that conversion on import comes with a lot of performance benefits and flexibility, while still allowing you to bring elements across to Katana whenever needed. The Katana team's vision for introducing native USD is to let you work with a combination of USD and Katana workflows, so you don't have to choose one or the other. We understand the transition to USD is a big move and want to help support that by keeping the workflows flexible. Because of this, in order to use these new workflows in Katana, you don't have to be working with a fully USD pipeline. So instead of moving your entire pipeline to USD at once, you can do this move gradually, department by department, to make the transition to USD as smooth and risk-free as possible. We also know that USD is still developing, and so Katana's approach to native USD workflows allows the space for that growth. So in Katana, Hydra reads the scene information the same whether it's coming through native USD or whether it's being converted to Katana. At render time, the USD data will be converted automatically. So again, it doesn't matter what format the information is coming from, everything will work together in one scene. This all means that you get all the benefits of Katana, like multi-shot workflows, Foresight Plus, lighting tools, Nuke Bridge, as well as all the strengths of USD. You can build your projects and your node graph with a combination of USD and Katana data, manipulate the data on both sides, and then bring elements over from USD to Katana to make further edits with Katana nodes whenever needed. And this release really is just the beginning for native USD workflows. There's a lot more development planned for future releases focused on both USD and Hydra. So let's jump into what's been added to support these workflows. You now have access to a collection of new native USD nodes, which allow you to compose and manipulate USD stages inside Katana. You can create prims for defining your stage hierarchy, build up your scene through USD composition arcs, then make edits to prim properties, make transformations, setting variants, and so on. The Scene Explorer tab has also been introduced to support USD scene trees. This tab is designed to be a long-term replacement of the Scene Graph tab, which is still available, but because the Scene Explorer has the Katana tree and USD tree all in one place, you can be using it even if you're not yet working with USD, and you should find it more performant as well. You also have much of the same functionality as the Scene Graph, including deferred loading, bookmarking, implicit resolving, selective rendering, and filtering. On the Katana side, the UI for the working sets has been updated to align more with the design of Nuke's Scene Graph. And on the USD side, you can view the type, kind, and purposes for the prims in the tree. There's also 2 new working sets which have been introduced on the USD side, which gives you control over payload loading and activating or deactivating prims in the viewer. When the payload working set is enabled, expansion-based loading is replaced with payload loading, where payloads, indicated by the arrows, can be selected from the working set column. Because payloads will usually be used for each asset, this can be a great way of managing those heavy elements in your scene. When used in combination with the viewer visibility working set, this can let you keep your scene tree collapsed while still having all the elements you need visible in the viewer. When this working set is disabled again, you can use the expansion-based loading that you may be used to. The active working set is similar to viewer visibility, but often more efficient because when prims are deactivated, it actually prevents their children being composed to the stage. This lets you remove elements from the viewer that you may not need to see, but would still like to include in renders. Using a combination of these new working sets and the existing ones gives you a huge amount of control over your scene and which parts are loaded or visible at any one point. USD properties can be viewed in the Attributes tab, so all the attributes and relationships are available in the same place, whether you're selecting a USD or Katana location. So let's jump into Katana and see some of these workflows in action. We can build up the scene hierarchy using prims and have control over the prim specifier and how they're defined. For example, classes can be created as locations to inherit or specialize from. Defines can be created to load layers to, or give a type and create geometry like cubes and planes, or things like cameras and shaders. We can also have children and parents with different specifiers, for example, defines under classes, so your hierarchy can look and behave exactly as you need it to. Once we have this hierarchy, we can bring in our USD layers using the composition arcs available. These layers will likely be your assets, look, layout, animation, cameras, and so on. It will depend on your pipeline and workflows, how the layers are exported, and how they need to be brought into Katana. But you can load them as sublayers, payloads, or references. For example, using sublayers, we can bring in those layers to the root level of the scene tree, or to load entire stages exported from other software which are already composed. Payloads need to be loaded to an existing prim, and we can then choose the prim path from the asset to load if needed. References are similar, except with payloads, we have the benefit of choosing which are loaded using the payload working set. References can be used to bring in layers such as look files, which can be loaded to existing locations, or assembly files which have a payload and references appended within. You can also bring in multiple layers to the same location, so in this case our payload, such as the layout and animation, as well as the look. If multiple references are brought in with the same opinion, then the node graph ordering will determine which is stronger. You can also change that list position for these references to control which opinions are strongest. Appending it will put it to the back of the list, so the opinion will be weaker, and therefore any other opinion will take effect. You can also delete them from the list to remove those opinions, or reset the list to ignore those list edits from any weaker layers. Again, how these layers are brought in will depend on your pipeline, and it's likely you'll have composed stages to load in as opposed to individual layers. But you also have all these options for composing your stages inside Katana. We can then specialize or inherit from these locations to create multiple instances of that prim and its hierarchy. Specializing and inheriting will give you the same result, but because their opinions have different strengths, we can make overrides to any of the specialized opinions, but not the inherited ones, unless they're local. Utilizing this difference between specializes and inherits will give you more control about the aspects of certain assets that you either may want to override in the future or protect against any possible overrides. When you want to manipulate this data inside Katana, you can use the new native USD nodes, or you can convert any elements over from USD to Katana locations and attributes in order to make edits with Katana nodes. For example, here I'm bringing the shot camera across so I can view through it, as viewing through USD cameras isn't yet supported. I can specify where I want it to be located, and other options like isolating paths, and specifying motion sample times for adding motion blur to your renders. This node can be great if there are specific elements that you want to bring across, but this conversion will also happen automatically at render time. So you can find the same options available in the render settings node under Deferred USD to Katana. When manipulating the data natively, we can edit these prims' properties, their attributes, relationships, and metadata using the relevant nodes. As an example, I can turn off a prim's visibility to remove it from the scene. Here I'm changing the visibility attribute to invisible. And we can see this in the Attributes tab. If I disable and enable the node, then we can see the change. I'll also set off a render so we can see this a bit more clearly, because unlike the viewer visibility working set, which removes items from the viewer, this visibility attribute also affects renders. So if I disable and enable this node again, we can see that change reflected in the render. I can also change the material bindings for any mesh to another material in the scene. Here I'm replacing the material for one of the gun props to a glass material, which is just another material brought in with the stage. Again, we can see that update in the Attributes tab under the Relationships. And if I restart this render, then we can see that change there too. I could also change this prim's metadata. So here I'm changing the kind from an assembly to a component. And there's a lot of other use cases for these nodes. You can use them to manipulate any of the prim properties, so you really do get a lot of flexibility and control over your stages inside Katana. And the parameters of these nodes are also very similar to the attribute set Katana node, so they will be familiar workflows for those of you used to working with Katana. We can also make any transformations that might be needed to override the layout, making it really easy to make those final tweaks and refinements without having to jump back up the pipeline and rebaking any layers. You can also set any variants that have come in with any of your layers. So if you have material or geometry variations that you want to switch between at any point, then you can do this inside Katana as well. Again, making it easy for any last-minute changes. You could even link these variant options up to a graph state variable to keep all your scene variations in one place. Again, combining the strengths and workflows of both USD and Katana. If you want to prune any elements from your scene, For example, on a per-shot basis, you can do this by deactivating those prims to stop them being composed on the stage. In this example, we have a fairly large environment, but some of these hallways aren't actually seen in the shot camera. So they can be deactivated to optimize the scene. Just for demonstration, I'll set the paths for this character and the turret here instead, so we can see more clearly what effect this node has. You can see those assets are immediately removed from the viewer, and their hierarchy is removed from the scene tree as well, because that location is no longer being composed. If I set off another render, we can see that, unlike the active working set, which only affects the viewer, this node will affect your renders as well. So it's a great workflow for removing any unnecessary elements from the scene. Jumping into a more developed scene, I can demonstrate these workflows a little better in more context. I've built the scene up using a combination of USD workflows and all the Katana workflows that you're used to. So the scene is built up of my USD stage. The layers are composed inside Katana. So the payloads, materials, layout, animation, and cameras have been brought in natively. I have VDBs brought into the Katana side, and I have the light setup, again, Katana locations. For things like light linking, I can use implicit resolvers to view paths that will exist after the deferred USD to Katana conversion. So I can make these links without needing to do the conversion earlier. I have brought the camera over to Katana so I can view through it. And then I can set off renders or use the render delegate, work with the nuke bridge, and see all these elements together. So again, it doesn't matter how this data is coming in, we can work with it all together in one scene. And because we can have live renders streamed through a live comp, we can make use of this to continue making the edits to lighting in the scene and see how these changes look in the context of a comp. I'm just demonstrating this to reiterate that in order to use the new native USD workflows, you won't need to learn an entire new system. Your previous Katana workflows really won't need to change for the most part. It's just a new way to bring that data in and manipulate it. Everything's been engineered to bring you as much flexibility as possible. The extent of manipulation of the USD data that will be needed inside Katana will depend on your pipeline. But in the usual Katana way, once your template is set up, it's there ready to be used for any number of future projects. And as I mentioned earlier, this is just the beginning of Katana's native USD journey. As USD workflows continue to grow and develop, so will Katana. The product team have some really exciting plans for the future involving both USD and Hydra. So keep an eye out for any updates on those plans in the future. Thank you everyone for joining me and the Foundry team today. You can head over to the Katana Learn page for more information about the features we covered in this session. Also note that Katana is part of our education collective, so most schools have access to Katana as part of their current software package. This means that if you're a student, you can get access to Katana either through your school or at the new price of $99. Please do feel free to reach out to us with any questions. Thank you.